Most people don't realise just how special Lancia were. It was the first manufacturer to produce a monocoque car. They were the first with the 5-speed gearbox and a V6. In this era, Lancia were muttered in the same breath as Aston Martin and Ferrari, and they were actually often better. This is a Flaminia. It is a replacement for the revolutionary Aurelia and uses a development of the very first production V6. It's worth noting that when new, these were the same price as a DB5, and the current owner, Peter, has had both and actually says that this is the better drive. So let's find out. No seat belts, of course, on this one, which takes a little bit of getting used to, but honestly, it's such a dream to be driving this. I'm such a fan of these cars. Now, a little bit of an explanation of the Flaminia range and how it worked, because it's quite unusual. They had a total of 3 coach builders who made these cars. So the first, the mainstream cars, let's call them, the saloons and the ordinary coupes, not this one, those were steel-bodied and they were made by Pininfarina. I'm not going to apologise for the Italian pronunciation. I am Italian, so throughout this video I will say Lancia, Flaminia and so on. So Pininfarina is the first lot of cars. Then Zagato made a load of aluminium bodied cars as well. They're the ones that are most highly prized at the moment. I think maybe they have most of the sort of the supercar look about them. They're a bit more forward looking perhaps than this design. But then there was this, made by Carrozzeria Turing. And like the Zagato cars, they are all aluminium bodied. So it's a space frame, aluminium body panels. They made a GT, which was the short wheelbase version, and then a 2+2, although it's 2+2 in name only, because those rear seats, there's absolutely no room. This is a GTL, and they are extremely rare. I think only 300 in all were made. There was also different in engines. The early cars had 2.5 litre engines, and the later cars like this 2.8s, and the engines went from about 100 to 150 horsepower. This is the later evolution, so 150 ponies. Let's see how it feels now going down the road. So first gear, lovely slick gear change. Imagine in those days, in the 60s, it was a pretty quick car. Nowadays, it wouldn't blow you away with the power, but you can easily keep up with modern traffic. And the incredible thing about this engine is just how tractable it is. It's a little sweetie pie. From as low as 1500 revs in 4th gear, it will just smoothly pull along. It's lovely. The only thing I would say that I've picked up on this particular example, and I was talking to Peter about it earlier, is that it doesn't feel like it particularly wants to rev. I'm not sure if that's a characteristic of this. They have triple Webers, but 4.5 is about as high as you really want to go on this one. I think he said the GT, he's also got a short wheelbase car, is a little bit revious. It could just be that it needs a tune-up, but in any case, it's supposed to be a touring car. And in that role, it works so well. It's very long geared, which I think is another reason why you think maybe that the engine isn't that eager to rev. Now, these really were unbelievable cars in the 60s. You had to be a proper gentleman to have a Lancia. A Ferrari was more of a sort of nouveau riche, I would say. These things were so amazingly built, and even today when you look around this cabin and look at just the switch gear, it's all bespoke stuff. None of the Lancias of this time, they had all sorts of different ranges. They didn't share any common parts, which is also why they ended up being bankrupt. They did that because they made everything specifically tailored for each model. The engineering is unbelievable. The passenger seat, when it moves forward, I think this seat as well, you can see that it tilts off to the side to give you better access. There's so many nice little touches like that. The Jaeger instrumentation, of course, is beautiful, and the leatherwork, it's almost akin to a very expensive leather suitcase, the way it's done. It just looks like that leather is millimeters thick. The switchgear is all pretty simple, but incredibly it's not labelled, so you kind of have to know these are all identical. They do different things. There's interior lights, then there's ventilation. I can't remember what that one is. This is, I think, switching between to flash the lights. You have here the indicator, and then dipped beam is a little button there. It's just a lovely thing, and the squirter for the windows, for the wipers, is there. Another lovely little chromed delicate button. The gear change is located in a very odd position of the car. You'd think it would be on the transmission tunnel. It's not. It comes off the floor on the driver's side, but it's angled so that it's quite natural to use, and it's beautifully slick and mechanical in the way that only these older cars can offer. A modern car, it's very rare really, maybe an MX-5, it's a different type of shift, but it has the same mechanical feel as something like this. The throttle is really easy to measure, but towards the end of its travel, it's just incredibly stiff. It steers absolutely beautifully though. It's a bit vague on the straight ahead, all these steering box cars are, but once you get into the corner, oh my. Let's just do another pull through the gears and we'll get out this traffic, and then I'll take it through those bends a bit quicker and tell you why these are so special. I find it so disconcerting not to have a belt. It's so unusual nowadays, and I kind of feel naked. Okay, nice little pull through the gears again. Let's gear. So yeah, I got up to 5,000 revs there, but there really isn't any point. I think 4.5 is where you want to be. Now, what is incredible about this, as well as the build quality, the solidity, everything sort of feels expensive. All the things you interact with, from the steering to brakes, but is how it handles. Like all these older cars, there's a little bit of softness in it, but wow. The suspension, however they've engineered it, it's beautiful, and it's bizarre because at the back, this actually has leaf springs. It's got proper wishbones at the front, which was an upgrade from the sliding pin Aurelia. But at the back, they've got a DD-on back axle, leaf springs, so it doesn't seem to be particularly advanced. It drives so well. Peter said that he preferred it to his DB5, and I have to say I can understand why. In terms of chassis dynamics, this is definitely a lot better. So it's got a perfect compromise between the beautiful ride, but then in the corners it doesn't just sag, and under braking it doesn't pitch or wallow. It's really controlled. Absolutely gobsmacking that they could make something that drives like this at that point in time. quality isn't up to the same standards. I don't think it handles as well as this, but there is one area where a DB5 feels better than this. The engine is stronger, so the 2.8s produced 150 horsepower versus a DB5, which I think weighed about the same, but had almost another 100 horsepower. You can feel that. But this is just a beauty. It drives so incredibly well. Enzo Ferrari is reputed to have said that this was the best handling car of its time, and I can well believe it. Although this was the same price as a DB5 and it was the most luxurious Italian car you could buy at the time, Flaminias, apart from the Zagato models, haven't really had the recognition that they deserve. There's an interesting story about how this one came to be, because back in, I think, the early 90s, it was found in Maryland, where it had been languishing. Vandals had broken in, cut the leather seats. A firm of lawyers had employed someone to try and go over the estate of someone who was deceased. The guy who was looking up the various properties found this, fell in love with it so much that he said, look, can you just pay me my fees in this car? I'll take this in payment. Don't forget, at the time it was heavily vandalized, some of the panels were dented, the interior was cut, and it had no engine, but he still took it on board. Even more amazingly, his wife was also working on the estate. She was in another house and she found an envelope to mark Lancia. Within that, there was a receipt for a complete engine overhaul some 27 years earlier for $450. Now, the guy who owned it, the guy whose estate it was, he was a bit of a recluse, obviously a bit of an odd fruit. But they sort of traced this, the garage, the shop, you'd say in America, that had rebuilt the engine. And of course, it had shut down long ago, but there was a house close by to where this was found, where the original owner of the garage was still living at the age of 93. So the chap went over and spoke to him and said, look, you know, there isn't any chance you still have that engine, or you know what happened to it, did you? And he said, yeah, absolutely, it's still in the shop. So the guy never paid for the invoice, the $450 invoice. And he was happy to give it to him 27 years later, a rebuilt engine still kept in tip-top condition, in return for simply paying that invoice. So what an incredible story. So this was then mated with its matching numbers engine. It makes me sad when you see cars like this and you see that Italy was absolutely at the top of its game, and I would say at that point it was at the top of the automobile industry. It was making the very best cars. To see what has happened today, of course we still have Ferrari, which is doing very, very well. But soon after this was made, it was the start of the rise of the Germans. That at this time, they just weren't there. BMW, Mercedes, well, Mercedes was, I suppose, but BMW certainly wasn't, Audi wasn't. And the Italians just, you know, still made some interesting, cool cars, but they didn't make class-leading cars like this one. It's been a real privilege to drive this today. Thank you so much to Peter for bringing it down. Thank you to all of you for watching, and please, if you have a car, a Lancia of this area, I really want to do an Aurelia, so if you have one, a coupe really ideally, and you're happy to bring it to me, then please do get in touch. That's the best address, but other Lancias as well, later ones, Italian cars, anything like that, do get in touch and let's see if we can do a video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I really look forward to seeing you for the next one. Please do subscribe if you haven't already.